so don't stop.
Hey everyone, this is Mr. Lawback. Thank you for joining me. In this video, I'm going to go over the earlier parts of Reconstruction. Reconstruction was the period between 1865 and 1867 that followed the Civil War, during which attempts were made to redress the inequities of slavery and its political, social, and economic legacy, and to solve the problems that will arise from the admission to the Union of the 11 states that had seceded at or before the outbreak of the Civil War. There were many challenges. There were three main challenges. Number one, how do we bring the South back into the Union? Reunion and reconciliation. There were a lot of differences among people on how that should happen. Number two, what branch of government should control the process of Reconstruction? Should it be the legislative branch, Congress, or should it be the president and the executive branch? And number three, and this was very practical, how do we integrate and protect the newly emancipated freed men and freed women? Remember, 4 million people had gained freedom because of the Civil War and the 13th Amendment. Reconstruction witnessed far-reaching changes in American political life. It focused on political and social rebuilding of the South and not the actual infrastructure like the many bridges, buildings, roads, and railroads that were destroyed. That was left up more to the state level government to handle that. Differing views of Reconstruction, congressional versus presidential, was a big question. Who should control Reconstruction? Should it be the president or should it be Congress? President Lincoln, even before the end of the Civil War, introduced his 10% plan. He wanted Reconstruction to be very quick and accepting. He did not want Reconstruction to be punitive. He did not want to punish the South. He wanted to accept the South back into the Union, almost like a long-lost relative. His 10% plan called for 10% of the voters to take a pledge of allegiance to the Union. The radical Republicans wanted to punish the South and make strict conditions for readmission. This happened in the form of the Wade-Davis bill, which was named after two members of Congress that introduced this bill that were radical Republicans. Lincoln, of course, ended up pocket vetoing the Wade-Davis bill, and it never actually became a law. The Freedmen's Bureau was established by the federal government in 1865, and the mission of the Freedmen's Bureau was to defend the rights of freed men and to look after the abandoned land in the South. Among other things, it was to put in place ways to provide food, clothing, and education for white refugees and freed blacks. The Freedmen's Bureau built schools and churches and arranged for teaching and reading for many blacks. While it did not fulfill all of its goals and it was relatively short-lived, the Freedmen's Bureau is often considered one of the most successful parts of Reconstruction. President Andrew Johnson, who filled in for an assassinated Lincoln, took an active role in Reconstruction. He wanted to follow Lincoln's plan in the sense that he wanted to welcome the South back in. At first, many Republicans in Congress were happy about Johnson in the fact that he had a great disdain for the Southern gentry. At the end of May 1865, about a month after Lincoln's assassination, President Andrew Johnson announced his plan for Reconstruction, which reflected both his staunch unionism and his belief in states' rights. In Johnson's view, the Southern states had never given up their right to govern themselves, and the federal government had no right to determine voting requirements or other questions which historically been handled by the state level. Under Johnson's Reconstruction plan, all land that had been confiscated by the Union Army and intended to be distributed to the formerly enslaved people by the Army or the Freedmen's Bureau reverted to its pre-war owners. Apart from being required to uphold the abolition of slavery in compliance with the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, swear loyalty to the Union, and pay off war debt, Southern state governments were given free rein to rebuild themselves with no federal government assistance. As a result of Johnson's leniency, many Southern states in 1865 and 1866 successfully enacted a series of harsh laws known as Black Codes, which were designed to restrict freed Black people's activities and ensure their availability as a labor force. These repressive codes enraged many in the North including numerous members of Congress who refused to seat congressmen and senators elected by these southern state governments. In early 1866, Congress passed the Freedmen's Bureau and Civil Rights Act and sent them to Johnson for his signature. The first bill extended the life of the Freedmen's Bureau, originally established as a temporary organization charged with assisting refugees and formerly enslaved people, while the second defined all persons born in the United States as national citizens who were to enjoy equality before the law. After Johnson vetoed both of these bills, it caused a permanent rupture in the relationship between him and Congress and would ultimately lead to him being impeached in 1868. The Civil Rights Act became the first major bill to become law over a presidential veto. It should be noted that after Johnson was impeached, he was not expelled from office as they came up one vote short in expulsion in the Senate. William Sherman's Field Order number 15 of January 1865. Now, this would set aside large plots of land along the coast of South Carolina and Georgia for exclusive settlement for black families by the Freedmen's Bureau, which authorized the Bureau to rent or sell the land that used to be in the possession of the former slave owners to the former slaves. Johnson, however, ended up returning this land to these former slave owners. This is where the dream of the, quote, 40 acres and a mule ended. Lacking land, most former slaves had little economic alternative other than resuming work on plantations owned by whites and working for little wages or working in the form of sharecropping. Neither status offered much economic mobility to the newly freed slaves. Most blacks in the South were trapped in this endless cycle of poverty and landlessness even after slavery had ended. In the fall of 1866, Northerners overwhelmingly elected more radical Republicans to Congress. This new Congress passed Reconstruction Act of 1867. Again, this was over Johnson's veto. The South was divided into 5 military districts. Each was under control of a Union general. Charles Sumner of Massachusetts, the one that was caned before the Civil War on the floor of the Senate, and Thaddeus Stevens of Pennsylvania were some of the most notable radical Republicans in Congress. Under this Radical Reconstruction Act of 1867, Southern states were required to ratify the 14th Amendment, which called for equal protection under the law, among other things. Congress approved the 15th Amendment in 1870, which guaranteed that a citizen's right to vote would not be denied on account of race, color, or previous conditions of servitude. By 1870, all of the former Confederate states had been admitted to the Union, and the state constitutions during the years of radical Reconstruction were the most progressive in the region's history. The participation of African Americans in Southern public life after 1867 would be by far the most radical development of Reconstruction, which was essentially a large-scale experiment in interracial democracy. Southern black people would win elections to Southern state governments and even the U.S. Congress during this time period.